I am old now, and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have neither husband, nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom they can hurt me. My body, this lean carrion that still has to be washed and fed and have clothes hung about it daily with so many changes, they may kill as soon as they please. The succession is provided for. My crown passes to my nephew. Being for all these reasons free from fear, I will write in this book what no one who has happiness would dare to write. I will accuse the gods, especially the god who lives on the gray mountain. That is, I will tell all he has done to me from the very beginning, as if I were making my complaint of him before a judge. But there is no judge between gods and men, and the god of the mountain will not answer me. Terrors and plagues are not an answer. I write in Greek as my old master taught it to me. It may some day happen that a traveler from the Greek lands will again lodge in this palace and read the book. Then he will talk of it among the Greeks, where there is great freedom of speech, even about the gods themselves. Perhaps their wise men will know whether my complaint is right, or whether the god could have defended himself if he had made an answer. I was Arual, the eldest daughter of Trom, king of Glome. The city of Glome stands on the left hand of the river Shennet, to a traveler who was coming up from the southeast, not more than a day's journey above Ringal, which is the last town southward that belongs to the land of Glome. The city is built about as far back from the river as a woman can walk in the third of an hour, for the Shennet overflows her banks in the spring. In summer, there was then dry mud on each side of it, and reeds, and plenty of waterfowl. About as far beyond the ford of the Shennet as our city is on this side of it, you come to the holy house of Ungit, and beyond the house of Ungit, going all the time east and north, you come quickly to the foothills of the Grey Mountain. The god of the Grey Mountain, who hates me, is the son of Ungit. He does not, however, live in the house of Ungit, but Ungit sits there alone, in the furthest recess of her house, where she sits. It is so dark that you cannot see her well. But in summer, enough light may come down from the smoke holes in the roof to show her a little. She is a black stone, without head or hands or face, and a very great goddess. My old master, whom we called the fox, said she was the same who the Greeks called Aphrodite. But I write all the names of people and places in our language. I will begin my writing with the day my mother died, and they cut off my hair, as the custom is. The fox, but he was not with us then, said it is a custom we learned from the Greeks. Bata, the nurse, shore me and my sister Redival outside the palace, at the foot of the garden which runs steeply up the hill behind. Redival was my sister, 3 years younger than I, and we two were still the only children. While Bata was using the shears, many other of the slave women were standing round, from time to time wailing for the queen's death and beating their breasts. But in between, they were eating nuts and joking. As the shears snipped and Redival's curls fell off, the slaves said, "Oh, what a pity, all the gold gone." They had not said anything like that while I was being shorn. But what I remember best is the coolness of my head and the hot sun on the back of my neck when we were building mud houses, Redival and I, all that summer afternoon. Our nurse, Bata, was a big-boned, fair-haired, hard-handed woman whom my father had bought from traders who got her further north. When we plagued her, she would say, "Only wait till your father brings home a new queen to be your stepmother. It'll be changed times for you then. You'll have hard cheese instead of honey cakes then, and skim milk instead of wine. Wait and see." As things fell out, we got something else before we got a stepmother. There was a bitter frost that day. Redival and I were booted. We mostly went barefoot or sandaled, and trying to slide in the yard, which is at the back of the oldest part of the palace, where the walls are wooden. There was ice enough all the way from the byre door to the big dunghill, what with frozen spills of milk and puddles, and the stale of the beasts, but too rough for sliding. And out comes Bata, with the cold reddening her nose, calling out, "Quick, quick! Ah, you filthies! Come and be cleaned, and then to the king. You'll see who's waiting for you there. My word, this'll be a change for you." "Is it the stepmother?" said Redival. "Oh, worse than that, you'll see," said Bata, polishing Redival's face with the end of her apron. "Lots of whippings for the pair of you, lots of ear pullings, lots of hard work." And we were led off and over to the new parts of the palace, where it is built of painted brick, and there were guards in their armor, and skins and heads of animals hung up on the walls. In the pillar room, our father was standing by the hearth, and opposite him there were 3 men in traveling dress whom we knew well enough, traders who came up to Glome 3 times a year. They were just packing up their scales, so we knew they had been paid for something, and one was putting up a fetter, so we knew they must have sold our father a slave. There was a short, thick-set man standing before them, and we knew this must be the man they had sold, for you could see the sore places on his legs where the irons had been. But he did not look like any other slave we had ever known. He was very bright-eyed, and whatever of his hair and beard was not gray was reddish. "Now, Greekling," said my father to this man, "I trust to beget a prince one of these days, and I have a mind to see him brought up in all the wisdom of your people. Meanwhile, practice on them." He pointed at his children. "If a man can teach a girl, he can teach anything." Then, just before he sent us away, he said, "Especially the elder. See if you can make her wise. It's all about she'll ever be good for." I didn't understand that, but I knew it was like things I had heard people say of me ever since I could remember. I loved the fox, as my father called him, better than anyone I'd ever known. You would have thought that a man who had been free in the Greek lands, and then taken in war and sold far away among the barbarians, would be downcast. And so he was sometimes, possibly more often than I, in my childishness, guessed. But I never heard him complain, and I never heard him boast, as all the other foreign slaves did, about the great man he had been in his own country. He had all sorts of sayings to cheer himself up with. No man can be an exile if he remembers that all the world is one city, and everything is as good or bad as our opinion makes it. But what I think really kept him cheerful was his inquisitiveness. I never knew such a man for questions. He wanted to know everything about our country and language and ancestors and gods, and even our plants and flowers. That was how I came to tell him all about Ungit, about the girls who are kept in her house, and the presents that brides have to make to her, and how we sometimes, in a bad year, have to cut someone's throat and pour the blood over her. He shuddered when I said that and muttered something under his breath, but a moment later he said, "Yes, she is undoubtedly Aphrodite, though more like the Babylonian than the Greek. But come, I'll tell you a tale of our Aphrodite." Then he deepened and lilted his voice and told how their Aphrodite once fell in love with the prince Anchises, while he kept his father's sheep on the slopes of a mountain called Ida. And as she came down the grassy slopes towards the shepherd's hut, lions and lynxes and bears and all sorts of beasts came about her, fawning like dogs, and all went from her again in the pairs to the delights of love. But she dimmed her glory and made herself like a mortal woman, and came to Anchises, and beguiled himself, and they went together into his bed. I think the fox had meant to end here, but the song now had him in its grip, and he went on to tell what followed. How Anchises woke from sleep and saw Aphrodite standing in the door of his hut, not now like a mortal, but with the glory. So he knew he had lain with the goddess, and he covered his eyes and shrieked, "Kill me at once!" "Not that this ever really happened," said Fox in haste. "It's only lies of poets, child, not in accordance with nature." But he had said enough to let me see that if the goddess was more beautiful in Greece than in Glome, she was equally terrible in each. It was always like that with the fox. He was ashamed of loving poetry, all folly, child, and I had to work much at my reading and writing and what he called philosophy in order to get a poem out of him. But thus, little by little, he taught me many. Virtue, sought by man with travail and toil, was the one he praised most, but I was never deceived by that. The real lilt came into his voice, and the real brightness into his eyes when we were off into Take Me to the Apple-Laden Land, or The Moon's Gone Down, But Alone I Lie. He always sang that one very tenderly, and as if he pitied me for something. He liked me better than Redival, who hated study and mocked and plagued him and set the other slaves on to play tricks on him. We worked most often, in summer, on the little grass plot behind the pear trees, and it was there one day that the king found us. We all stood up, of course. 2 children and a slave with our eyes on the ground and our hands crossed on our breasts. The king smacked the fox heartily on the back and said, "Courage, fox. There'll be a prince for you to work on yet, please the gods. And thank them too, fox, for it can't often have fallen to the lot of a mere Greekling to rule the grandson of so great a king as my father-in-law that is to be. Not that you'll know or care more about it than an ass. You're all peddlers and hucksters down in the Greek lands, eh?" "Are not all men of one blood, master?" said the fox. "Of one blood?" said the king with a stare and a great bull laugh. "I'd be sorry to think so." Thus, in the end, it was the king himself and not Bata who first told us that the stepmother was really at hand. My father had made a great match. He was to have the 3rd daughter of the king of Caphad, who is the biggest king in all our part of the world. I know now why Caphad wanted an alliance with so poor a kingdom as we were, and I must have wondered how my father did not see that his father-in-law must already be a stinking man. The marriage itself was a proof of it. It cannot have been many weeks before the marriage took place, but in my memory, the preparations seem to have lasted for almost a year. All the brickwork round the great gate was painted scarlet, and there was new hangings for the pillar room, and a great new royal bed, which cost the king far more than he was wise to give. It was made of an eastern wood, which was said to have such virtue that 4 of every 5 children begotten in such a bed would be male. All folly, child, said the fox. These things come about by natural causes. And as the day grew nearer, there was nothing but driving in of beasts and slaughtering of beasts. The whole courtyard reeked with the skins of them, and baking and brewing. But we children had not much time to wander from room to room and stare and hinder, for the king suddenly took it into his head that Redval and I and 12 other girls, daughters of nobles, were to sing a bridal hymn, and nothing would do him but a Greek hymn, which was a thing no other neighboring king could have provided. But master, said the fox, almost with tears in his eyes. Teach him, fox, teach him, roared my father. What's the use of spending my good food and drink on your Greek belly if I'm not to get a Greek song out of you on my wedding night? What's that? No one's asking you to teach him Greek. Of course they won't understand what they're singing, but they can make the noises. See to it, or your back'll be redder than ever your beard was. It was a crazy scheme, and the fox said afterwards that the teaching of that hymn to us barbarians was what grayed the last red hair. I was a fox, he said. Now I am a badger. When we had made some progress in our task, the king brought the priest of Ungit in to hear us. I had a fear of that priest, which was quite different from my fear of my father. I think that what frightened me in those early days was the holiness of the smell that hung about him, a temple smell of blood, mostly pigeon's blood, but he sacrificed men too, and burnt fat, and singed hair, and wine, and stale incense. It is the Ungit smell. Perhaps I was afraid of his clothes too, all the skins they were made of, and the dried bladders, and the great mask shaped like a bird's head which hung on his chest. It looked as if there was a bird growing out of his body. He did not understand a word of the hymn, nor the music either, but he asked, "Are the young women to be veiled or unveiled?" Need you ask? Said the king with one of his great laughs, jerking his thumb in my direction. Do you think I want my queen frightened out of her senses? Veils, of course, and good thick veils, too. One of the other girls tittered, and I think that was the first time I clearly understood that I am ugly. This made me more afraid of the stepmother than ever. I thought she would be crueler to me than Redval because of my ugliness. It wasn't what Bata had said that frightened me. I had heard of stepmothers in plenty of stories, and when the night came, and we were all in the pillared porch, nearly dazzled with the torches, and trying hard to sing our hymn as the fox taught us, and he kept on frowning and smiling and nodding at us while we sang, and once he held up his hands in horror. Pictures of things that had been done to girls and the stories were dancing in my mind. Then came the shouts from outside, and more torches. And next moment they were lifting the bride out of the chariot. She was as thickly veiled as we, and all I could see was that she was very small. It was as if they were lifting a child. That didn't ease my fears. The little are spiteful, our proverb says. Then, still singing, we got her into the bridal chamber and took off her veil. I know now that the face I saw was beautiful, but I did not think of that then. All I saw was that she was frightened, more frightened than I, indeed terrified. It made me see my father as he must have looked to her, a moment since, when she had had her first sight of him standing to greet her in the porch. His was not a brow, a mouth, a girth, a stance, or a voice to quiet a girl's fear. We took off layer after layer of her finery, making her yet smaller, and left the shivering white body with its staring eyes in the king's bed, and we filed out. We had sung very badly.